Patricia Wilkinson stood at her living room window, binoculars hanging from her neck, watching the house at the end of Maple Street. The morning sun highlighted the silver streaks in her perfectly styled bob as she frowned, jotting notes in the small leather-bound notebook she carried everywhere. This was the 14th day in a row she'd documented violations at 1478 Maple Street. "Disgraceful," she whispered, clicking her tongue against her teeth. At 58, Patricia had ruled the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association for 7 straight terms with iron determination and a binder full of rules. The neighbors smiled and called her Patty during community meetings, but whispered Karen during backyard barbecues, a nickname she pretended not to know about but secretly hated more than unmowed lawns. Patricia lowered her binoculars and squinted. The grass was nearly 2 inches too tall now. The blue recycling bin had been left at the curb since Tuesday. The brass numbers on the mailbox were tarnished, and worst of all, the mailbox itself was stuffed so full of pizza flyers and local newspapers that the door wouldn't close properly. "That does it," Patricia said, snapping her notebook shut. She straightened her powder blue cardigan, adjusted her pearl necklace, and marched across her perfectly manicured lawn toward her target. The neighborhood was quiet on this Tuesday morning. Most people were at work or school, which is exactly how Patricia liked it. No nosy neighbors asking questions, no excuses from rule breakers, just Patricia and her mission to keep Oakwood Estates the envy of every suburban community in the county. As she walked, Patricia mentally reviewed the history of the mysterious house. The previous owners, the Thompsons, had moved out nearly a month ago. A moving truck had appeared one weekend, loaded up their belongings, and that was that. No goodbye party, no forwarding address left with the HOA office, nothing. The house had sat empty ever since, slowly becoming an eyesore that made Patricia's blood pressure rise every time she glanced out her window. She'd sent 3 violation notices already, each one returned unopened. She'd called the real estate agent listed on the property records, no response. She'd even contacted the county office to see if taxes were being paid. They were, but the clerk wouldn't tell her by whom. Patricia stopped at the edge of the neglected lawn, pulled out her digital camera, and began taking photos for her records. She photographed the overgrown grass, the overflowing mailbox, the faded trim that desperately needed repainting, and the blinds that hung crookedly in the front windows. "Abandoned," Patricia muttered, checking the images on her camera screen. "Just what we need. Property values plummeting because someone can't be bothered to maintain basic standards." She moved closer to peer through the front windows. The house appeared empty, but strangely clean inside. No dust, no cobwebs, almost as if someone had been there recently. Squatters? Patricia wondered aloud, her eyes narrowing. That would be the final straw. She'd have to call an emergency HOA meeting. What Patricia didn't notice was the unmarked gray van parked 2 blocks away. Inside, Special Agent Thomas Lee adjusted his headphones and focused his surveillance equipment on the busybody HOA president. He watched her circle the house like a hawk, documenting every detail. "Subject is back again," he spoke quietly into his radio. "3rd time this week. She's getting bolder, moving closer to the windows now." His partner's voice crackled through the speaker. "Keep monitoring. If she tries to enter, we'll need to reassess the operation." Thomas nodded, though no one could see him. "Copy that. But something tells me she won't stop at just looking. This lady seems determined to find out what's going on in that house." As if on cue, Patricia tried the front door handle. It was locked, of course. She huffed in frustration, then marched back home, already planning her next move. The annual Oakwood Estates Garden Competition arrived on a perfect Saturday in May. Patricia had spent months preparing her roses, pruning each bush with surgical precision, measuring the soil faith daily, and even playing classical music to encourage growth. Her garden was her sanctuary, her pride, her claim to neighborhood fame for the past 6 years. This year would be no different, or so she thought. Patricia stood in her backyard, wearing her special gardening hat with the wide brim, greeting the 3 judges with practiced charm. She offered them homemade lemonade as they examined her prized English roses, nodding and smiling at their compliments. "The color variation is exceptional this year, Patricia," said Mrs. Wilson, the head judge. "Thank you. I imported a special fertilizer from Belgium," Patricia replied, already mentally clearing space on her mantle for the first-place trophy. But when the results were announced that evening at the community clubhouse, Patricia's name was called for second place. Second, not first. The room spun slightly as she forced herself to smile and accept the smaller silver trophy instead of the gold one she'd won 6 years running. The winner was Bill Thompson from Oak Lane, a man who'd moved in just last year and barely knew a tulip from a turnip. His dahlias showed remarkable innovation, the judges explained when Patricia cornered them later. Innovation? Since when was innovation more important than tradition and precision? Patricia drove home in silence, the silver trophy tossed onto the passenger seat. As she turned onto Maple Street, the abandoned house came into view, its unkempt lawn now littered with dandelions that would surely spread seeds throughout the neighborhood. "That's it," she muttered, gripping her steering wheel. "That's why I lost." In Patricia's mind, it was crystal clear. The judges had driven past that eyesore on their way to her house. Their aesthetic sensibilities had been offended before they even reached her garden. How could anyone properly appreciate her Belgian-fertilized roses when their eyes had just been assaulted by 3-inch grass and peeling paint? That night, Patricia opened a bottle of Chardonnay she'd been saving for her victory celebration. One glass turned into 2, then 3 as she scrolled through photos of previous year's wins on her tablet. The HOA emergency meeting she'd called earlier that week had been a disaster. Only 7 members had shown up, not enough for a quorum to vote on official action against the abandoned house. "We can't just break in, Patricia," Harold from the Finance Committee had said. "There are laws." Laws. Rules. Patricia lived her life by rules. But what happened when following the rules didn't work? She pulled out the HOA handbook she'd largely written herself, flipping to Section 12, Emergency Powers of the Board. There was nothing specific about abandoned properties, but there was a vague clause about ensuring community standards in extenuating circumstances. Patricia poured a 4th glass of wine and made her decision. Rules were meant to protect communities, not bind the hands of those trying to uphold standards. From her bedroom drawer, she retrieved a small key. 5 years ago, when they'd replaced all the locks in the community clubhouse, the maintenance man had let slip that the new keys were universal models that worked on most standard locks in the development. Patricia had forgotten to return her copy. "I'm not breaking in," she told her reflection in the bathroom mirror as she applied fresh lipstick. "I'm conducting an official inspection. As HOA president, it's practically my duty." She tucked the key into her purse, along with her phone and a small flashlight. Then she put on her navy blue blazer, the one that made her look official, authoritative. In the unmarked van 2 streets over, Agent Thomas Lee watched through high-powered binoculars as Patricia emerged from her house, walking with unusual purpose despite the late hour. "Subject is on the move," he spoke into his radio, starting the van's engine. "She's heading toward the target property, and she looks determined." His partner's voice replied, "Follow at a distance. Let's see what she does." "Roger that," Thomas said, putting the van in gear. Operation Neighborhood Watch is about to get interesting. Patricia stood at the front door of the abandoned house, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no nosy neighbors were watching. The street was quiet, just the soft yellow glow of porch lights and the occasional blue flicker of televisions through living room windows. Perfect. Her heart pounded as she slipped the universal key from her purse. Was she really doing this? She thought of her second-place trophy sitting on her kitchen counter instead of displayed proudly on her mantel. Yes, she was definitely doing this. The first attempt with the key didn't work. Patricia frowned, jiggled it slightly, and tried again. On the 3rd try, she felt the tumbler click. The door opened with a soft creak that seemed thunderous in the quiet night. "Hello," she called softly, knowing no one would answer but feeling she should announce herself anyway. "HOA inspection." Patricia stepped inside, closing the door quickly behind her. She stood still for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness before switching on her small flashlight. The beam revealed a mostly empty living room. No furniture except a single folding chair in the corner. No pictures on the walls. No rugs on the hardwood floor. "How strange," she whispered, moving deeper into the house. The place was eerily clean for an abandoned property. No dust on the baseboards. No cobwebs in the corners. The air didn't even have that musty, unlived-in smell she expected. In the kitchen, Patricia found more puzzling evidence that the house wasn't truly abandoned. The counters were wiped clean. The sink had a dish-drying rack with a single mug. The refrigerator hummed quietly. Curiosity overtaking caution, Patricia opened the refrigerator door. Inside were basic groceries, milk, eggs, bread, some pre-packaged meals. All within their expiration dates. "Someone's definitely living here," she muttered. On the counter sat a stack of mail, neatly organized. Patricia picked up the top envelope. It was addressed to David Wilson with last month's date. She flipped through more envelopes, utility bills, all marked paid, a few official-looking letters with government seals. Next to the mail sat a laptop computer. That was the most surprising thing of all. Who would leave a laptop in an empty house? Patricia glanced toward the window, seeing only darkness outside. She bit her lip, then made her decision. She set down her flashlight and opened the laptop. To her surprise, it wasn't password protected. The screen lit up immediately, showing a desktop with several folders labeled with what seemed like code names: Operation Kingfisher, Subject Profiles, Surveillance Log. What in the world? Patricia whispered, clicking on Subject Profiles. A series of photographs appeared, each with detailed information beneath. Patricia gasped as she recognized her neighbors, the Henderson family from 2 streets over, Dr. Phillips, who lived across from the community pool, and Richard Coleman, her own vice president on the HOA board. She clicked on Richard's profile, her hands trembling slightly. The file contained detailed notes on his daily schedule, financial transactions, and photographs of him meeting with people Patricia didn't recognize in parking lots and coffee shops. "This can't be right," she murmured, scrolling through the information. "Richard is a retired accountant. He grows prize-winning tomatoes." She clicked on Operation Kingfisher next. A document opened with official letterhead, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Patricia's mouth went dry. This wasn't some random squatter. This was something much bigger. She was so absorbed in reading that she didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching from behind. She didn't notice the shadows shifting on the wall. She was completely unaware of anything else until a woman's stern voice broke the silence. "Patricia Wilkinson, please step away from the computer." Patricia jumped, nearly knocking over her flashlight as she spun around. 3 people stood in the kitchen doorway, 2 men and a woman. All wore casual clothes, but their posture was anything but casual. The woman in front, with short gray hair and sharp eyes, held up a badge. "I'm Special Agent Nancy Reynolds, Federal Bureau of Investigation," she said, her voice calm but leaving no room for argument. "You are currently trespassing in a federal facility and accessing classified information." Patricia felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees went weak. This was not at all what she had expected to find in her HOA inspection. There must be some mistake," Patricia stammered, her usual confidence evaporating. "I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. This house has been abandoned." "This house," Agent Reynolds cut her off, "is not abandoned, Ms. Wilkinson. It's a government surveillance post, and you have just broken federal law by entering without authorization." In the kitchen of a house at the end of Maple Street, Patricia Wilkinson, 7-term HOA president, gardening enthusiast, and enforcer of community standards, realized she had made the biggest mistake of her life. "This must be some kind of mistake," Patricia said, her voice higher than usual. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "I was just conducting an HOA inspection. This property has multiple violations." "Please step away from the computer, Ms. Wilkinson," Agent Reynolds repeated, gesturing with her free hand. The 2 men behind her moved to either side of the kitchen doorway, effectively blocking any escape. Patricia looked from face to face, searching for sympathy and finding none. Slowly, she closed the laptop and stepped back, her mind racing for a way to explain herself out of this mess. "I have authority to inspect properties in this neighborhood," she tried again, reaching for her purse. "I can show you the HOA bylaws." "Keep your hands where we can see them," one of the mail agents said firmly. Patricia froze, her hand halfway to her purse. This wasn't how people talked to her. She was Patricia Wilkinson. She ran bake sales and organized community cleanup days. She judged holiday decoration contests. She did not get treated like a common criminal. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, attempting to regain some dignity. If someone had simply responded to my violation notices. Ms. Wilkinson, Agent Reynolds interrupted, approaching the kitchen counter. You entered a private residence using an unauthorized key. You accessed government property without permission. These are serious offenses. Reynolds nodded to one of her colleagues, who moved to the laptop and closed it, disconnecting something from its side. What were you looking for when you broke in? Reynolds asked, her tone shifting from commanding to curious. Patricia blinked, caught off guard by the question. I wasn't breaking in. I was inspecting. The lawn is overgrown, the mailbox is full, there have been no lights on for weeks. So you were concerned about property values? Reynolds asked, raising an eyebrow. Of course, one neglected house can bring down an entire neighborhood. I've seen it happen before, Patricia said, warming to a familiar topic. Studies show that visible emptiness attracts crime and reduces property values by up to 15%. The corner of Reynolds' mouth twitched, almost a smile. And the computer? Was checking the homeowner's laptop part of your inspection. Patricia's confidence faltered. It was open. I thought it might contain contact information for the owner. Instead, you found classified FBI files, Reynolds said flatly. The reality of her situation hit Patricia like a bucket of cold water. These weren't security guards or local police who might be impressed by her HOA title. These were federal agents, and she had broken into their operation. Am I going to jail? Patricia asked, her voice small. Reynolds signaled to her colleagues. We need to continue this conversation elsewhere. Ms. Wilkinson, please come with us. Outside, the night had grown cooler. Patricia shivered as she was escorted to an unmarked black SUV parked a block away. Neighbors' curtains twitched as they passed. Patricia kept her head high, though inside she was crumbling with embarrassment. The drive was silent and tense. Patricia watched familiar streets pass by, the community center where she held monthly meetings, the park where she'd successfully banned dogs after a series of waste disposal incidents, the shopping center where she'd confronted teenagers about skateboarding on the sidewalk. Her kingdom, where her word was practically law. And now she was heading to a real police station to face real laws. The FBI field office was in a nondescript building downtown. Patricia was led through security, her purse and phone taken, and finally into a small, windowless room with a table, 3 chairs, and a large mirror that she assumed was two-way. Wait here, Agent Reynolds said, leaving her alone. Patricia sat perfectly straight, her hands folded on the table, trying to look composed. But her mind was spinning. What had those files meant? Why was the FBI watching her neighbors? And Richard Coleman, her gardening competition judge, her HOA vice president, what was he involved in? The door opened after what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes. Agent Reynolds entered with a thick folder, followed by one of the mail agents carrying coffee cups. Ms. Wilkinson, Reynolds said, placing a coffee in front of Patricia. We'd have a lot to discuss about what you saw tonight. But first, I need to know exactly how much you read and who you've told about the house at the end of Maple Street. Patricia looked at the steaming coffee, then back at Reynolds' stern face. She straightened her shoulders, drawing on 40 years of committee meeting experience. I haven't told anyone, she said firmly. Now, I think it's time you tell me what's happening in my neighborhood. Patricia sat stiffly in the uncomfortable metal chair, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. The interrogation room was colder than she liked, and the harsh fluorescent lighting did no favors for anyone's complexion. She'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, alone with her thoughts and growing anxiety. When the door finally opened, Agent Reynolds entered with a thick manila folder. She sat across from Patricia and laid the folder on the table between them. Do you know why we're here, Ms. Wilkinson? Reynolds asked, her tone surprisingly conversational. Patricia straightened her shoulders. Because I entered a house without permission, apparently. Though I still maintain it was an HOA inspection of an abandoned property. Reynolds nodded slowly. Let's set aside the breaking and entering for a moment. I'm more interested in what you saw on that computer. Patricia hesitated. The files had been confusing, full of technical terms and surveillance notes. I saw my neighbors' names and photographs. Why is the FBI watching people in Oakwood Estates? Instead of answering directly, Reynolds opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. They showed ordinary suburban scenes: a backyard barbecue, a man washing his car, a woman collecting mail from her mailbox. Oakwood Estates is a nice neighborhood, Reynolds said. Good schools, low crime rate, beautiful homes with perfect lawns. We work hard to maintain standards, Patricia replied automatically. Perfect place to hide, wouldn't you say? The question caught Patricia off guard. Hide? From what? Reynolds tapped one of the photos. 6 months ago, we received a tip about unusual financial transactions flowing through several accounts connected to Oakwood Estates. Large sums of money moving in and out in patterns consistent with money laundering. Patricia's jaw dropped. Money laundering? In my neighborhood? We established the surveillance house to monitor suspects and gather evidence, Reynolds continued. We've narrowed our focus to 3 residents who show all the classic signs of financial crimes. Patricia leaned forward, her earlier fear replaced by burning curiosity. Who? I know everyone in that neighborhood. I've lived there for 22 years. Reynolds studied Patricia for a long moment, as if making a decision. Then she pulled another photo from the folder and placed it in front of Patricia. The blood drained from Patricia's face as she recognized her HOA vice president, Richard Coleman, sitting in a coffee shop with 2 men she didn't know, passing an envelope under the table. Richard, she whispered, that's impossible. He's been on the board for 5 years. He judges the garden competition. And he manages your HOA's finances, doesn't he? Reynolds asked. Patricia nodded numbly. He's the treasurer. He has access to all the accounts, including the Special Assessment Fund for Community Improvements. Yes, we raised the fees last year for the playground renovation and pathway lighting project, Patricia said, her mind racing. Richard insisted we needed more money than the initial estimates. Reynolds nodded. Those projects provided perfect cover. Construction and landscaping are classic ways to launder money. Materials can be overbilled, contractors can be paid for work never completed, and receipts can be falsified. But the playground looks beautiful, Patricia protested. And the lighting along the walking paths is exactly what we wanted. Oh, the work gets done, Reynolds said. That's part of the scheme. But the costs are inflated and the extra money disappears into offshore accounts. Patricia felt sick. She prided herself on knowing everything that happened in Oakwood Estates. Every new fence installation, every unauthorized satellite dish, every non-regulation mailbox. How had she missed this? I don't understand, she said, her voice small. Why would Richard do this? He has a beautiful home, a nice car. Mr. Coleman isn't who he claims to be, Reynolds said gently. His real name is Robert Carson. Before moving to Oakwood Estates, he worked as an accountant for several businesses connected to organized crime in Philadelphia. Patricia stared at the photo again, seeing her friendly neighbor through new eyes. The man who brought homemade cookies to HOA meetings. The man who helped organize the community yard sale every spring. The man who had suggested she should only get second place in this year's garden competition. Oh my God, Patricia said suddenly. He was the head judge this year. The silence in the interrogation room stretched uncomfortably as Patricia stared at the photograph of Richard Coleman, her trusted HOA vice president. The same Richard who had helped her draft the new shed regulations last year. The same Richard who had voted against Harold's ridiculous proposal to allow above-ground pools. I don't understand, Patricia finally said, pushing the photo away. Richard runs our community watch program. Agent Reynolds smiled grimly. That's convenient for someone who needs to know everyone's comings and goings, isn't it? Patricia felt like the floor was tilting beneath her. Her world had suddenly turned upside down. She reached for her water glass with a shaky hand. We've been tracking a money laundering operation for nearly a year, Reynolds explained, opening another file. We followed the trail to Oakwood Estates 6 months ago. That's when we set up the surveillance house. Money laundering? In my neighborhood. Patricia's voice rose with indignation. Our bylaws specifically prohibit illegal activities. It's Section 4, Paragraph 7. Agent Chen, standing in the corner, coughed to hide a laugh. Reynolds shot him a look, then turned back to Patricia. Ms. Wilkinson, we believe Richard Coleman and 2 other residents are using your community improvement funds to clean dirty money. They've been skimming from your HOA fees and filtering funds through fake landscaping and maintenance companies. Patricia gasped. The gazebo renovation. It went $10,000 over budget. Richard said it was because of lumber prices. And the new playground equipment? Reynolds asked. $15,000 over estimate, Patricia admitted, her mind racing. And the holiday lighting display last Christmas? $22,000 over budget, Reynolds finished for her. That's a pattern. Patricia's shoulders slumped. She prided herself on running a tight ship, on knowing everything that happened in Oakwood Estates. How had this been going on right under her nose? The room fell silent again as Patricia processed everything. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Outside, someone walked past, their footsteps echoing in the hallway. Finally, Reynolds spoke again. Ms. Wilkinson, I'm going to be straight with you. Your unauthorized entry has created a problem for our operation. Patricia straightened her spine, preparing for the worst. I want it noted that I was acting in the best interests of the community. Noted, Reynolds said with a hint of amusement. Here's the situation. You know about our investigation now. That means you're either a risk to our operation or a potential asset. Patricia blinked. An asset? Reynolds leaned forward. We've been watching Richard and his associates for months, but we still need more evidence to make our case. We need someone on the inside who can get close without raising suspicion. You want me to spy on Richard? Patricia asked, her eyes widening. We want you to be exactly who you are, Agent Chen said, stepping forward. A detail-oriented HOA president who notices everything and sticks her nose in everyone's business. I prefer to call it community oversight, Patricia sniffed. Call it whatever you want, Reynolds said. But you have unique access. You run the meetings. You review the budgets. You organize community events where these people gather. And in return, Patricia asked, a lifetime of contract negotiations kicking in. What do I get out of this arrangement? Reynolds tapped the file containing Patricia's signed statement about breaking into the house. Contingent on your full cooperation and the successful completion of our operation, the breaking and entering charges would be reconsidered. Dropped entirely, Patricia countered, finding her footing again. Reynolds' lips twitched. Potentially. And I want to be kept informed about what's happening in my neighborhood, Patricia added. No more secrets. Within reason, Reynolds qualified. You'll have a handler you can report to. Limited information only. Patricia considered this for a long moment, tapping her fingers against the table. She thought of Richard's smug face when he'd handed her the second-place trophy. She thought of all those community meetings where he'd insisted on higher fees for necessary improvements. One more condition, Patricia said. When this is over and those criminals are gone, the FBI needs to fix that lawn at the end of Maple Street. It's an eyesore. Reynolds actually smiled then, a genuine one. Ms. Wilkinson, if you help us put these people away, I'll mow it myself. Patricia extended her hand across the table. Then I believe we have a deal, Agent Reynolds. Her eyes gleamed with new purpose. Nobody breaks the rules in my community, not even criminals. 3 months later, Patricia stood at her living room window, watching as 2 FBI agents escorted Richard Coleman to an unmarked car. Richard's hands were cuffed behind his back, his usually perfect hair disheveled. From down the street, neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering behind their hands. There goes the vice president of your HOA, Agent Reynolds said, coming to stand beside Patricia, and the leader of a money laundering operation that stole over $2 million from communities across 3 counties. Patricia sipped her morning tea, allowing herself a small smile of satisfaction. I always thought his garden didn't deserve first place. Behind them, Agent Lee was packing up the last of the surveillance equipment that had been hidden in Patricia's house for the past 12 weeks. Microphones disguised as outlet covers, tiny cameras in smoke detectors. Patricia had surprised herself by getting used to them. You did good work, Reynolds said, genuine respect in her voice. Most people would have backed out once things got dangerous. Patricia thought about the midnight meeting in the community garden where she pretended to find Richard's dropped notebook while secretly planting the FBI's listening device. She thought about the hours spent in board meetings, carefully asking questions that seemed innocent but were designed to get Richard talking about specific projects. She thought about the community picnic last weekend, where she'd spilled punch on Richard's laptop bag, creating a distraction while Agent Lee switched out the flash drive in his pocket. "I'm not most people," Patricia said simply. Reynolds smiled. "No, you certainly aren't." Agent Lee approached, carrying the last equipment case. "That's everything, boss." Reynolds nodded, then handed Patricia an official envelope with the FBI seal. "As promised, all charges related to your unauthorized entry have been dropped. The director included a personal letter thanking you for your assistance." Patricia accepted the envelope with dignity, though she couldn't help the slight tremble in her fingers. After a lifetime of following rules, she'd broken several federal laws. Yet somehow it had led to the best 3 months of her life. "What happens now?" Patricia asked, looking out the window again. The FBI car with Richard was gone, but the neighbors remained, certainly buzzing with gossip. "Now," Reynolds raised an eyebrow, "you go back to being the HOA president, making sure lawns are mowed and holiday decorations are tasteful." Patricia's heart sank a little, back to measuring grass height and sending violation notices about unauthorized wind chimes. "Unless," Reynolds continued, watching Patricia's face carefully, "you might be interested in something more." "More?" Patricia's pulse quickened. "The Bureau has a civilian consultant program for people with particular skills," Reynolds explained. "Observational skills, attention to detail, fearlessness in the face of garden variety criminals." Patricia's eyes widened. "Are you offering me a job, Agent Reynolds?" "Let's call it a community partnership," Reynolds said, smiling. "After all, you've proven quite effective at spotting when something isn't right in suburban America." After the agents left, Patricia walked through her quiet house. It felt emptier somehow without the hidden cameras and microphones, without the sense of purpose she'd found these past months. She made her way to the back patio and gazed out over her prize-winning garden. The roses were blooming spectacularly this year. They would certainly take first place now that Richard was gone. But for the first time in her life, Patricia wasn't thinking about garden competitions or HOA regulations. Her mind was filled with code names and surveillance techniques, with the thrill of catching criminals who thought they were too clever to be caught. She took out her phone and created a new contact, Agent Reynolds. Then she looked toward the house at the end of Maple Street. The lawn was neatly mowed now, the FBI keeping their promise before they packed up the operation. Patricia smiled. Her neighborhood was safe again, partly thanks to her. But somewhere out there, another community needed her sharp eyes and attention to detail. She was still Karen from the HOA to her neighbors, but to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, she was their most valuable asset in suburban surveillance. And Patricia found she quite liked her new double life.